What happened to the joyful boy who once reminded the world so much of the legendary Steve Irwin? Why is Terry Irwin now facing a heartbreaking fear she never spoke out loud? And what transformation in her 21-year-old son Robert Irwin has left this devoted mother crying in private, watching helplessly as he changes before her eyes? These are the questions haunting one of Australia's most beloved families. For years, Terry Irwin has carried her family through grief, rebuilding a world shattered the day Steve Irwin never came home. But nothing prepared her for the moment she realized her son was changing in ways she could no longer ignore. The confident, joyful boy who once embodied everything Steve represented now seemed weighed down by pressures number 21-year-old should have to bear. Long before the world knew her as the mother of Bindi and Robert, Terry Irwin was a young woman from Eugene, Oregon. Shaped by a childhood spent rescuing injured animals, she built her own rehabilitation center, Cougar Country, in 1986, caring for wounded cougars, raccoons, bobcats, and bears. Everything changed in 1991 when she traveled to Australia and met Steve Irwin at his family's small reptile park. What began as a simple visit turned into a life-altering connection, a partnership built on shared purpose and an almost immediate sense of destiny. When Steve died suddenly in 2006, Terry's world collapsed with brutal force. Overnight, she became a widow, a single mother, and the guardian of a global legacy. She described that time as living inside a fog, raising two grieving children while shouldering the responsibility of preserving Steve's message. She managed Australia's zoo, expanded the wildlife hospital, led conservation programs, and guided Bindi and Robert through childhood under the harsh spotlight of public expectation. Every day, she reminded herself that her children needed strength, even when she felt she had none left to give. As the years passed, Terry found small comfort in seeing pieces of Steve reflected in both her children. Bindi carried his compassion and emotional depth. Robert carried his enthusiasm, his courage, and the bright-eyed joy that made millions fall in love with the Irwins. Robert Irwin was born on December 1, 2003, into a world unlike any other child's. While most toddlers grew up with toys scattered across the living room floor, Robert's playground was Australia's zoo. He learned to walk between enclosures and watched his father handle crocodiles with legendary enthusiasm. Terry often said that watching him talk about animals felt like watching Steve all over again. It was comforting at first, but it also made Robert the center of attention long before he understood what that meant. By age 4, he was already appearing on television with his mother and sister. By 10, he was handling snakes and exotic animals on programs watched by millions. And by 14, he was a global phenomenon in his own right. With every successful appearance on The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon, every wildlife documentary, and every conservation project, the world celebrated him as the next Steve Irwin. It was a compliment that came from love. But for a young boy trying to understand who he was without the father he barely remembered, it was also a quiet burden. As Robert stepped into adulthood, the world applauded his poise, charm, and passion. He became not just a conservationist but a global media figure, appearing on talk shows, traveling for wildlife work, and earning acclaim as a photographer. But behind the scenes, the pressure mounted relentlessly. Robert wasn't just a young conservationist. He was the son of one of the most beloved cultural icons Australia had ever produced. Every step he took was compared to the path Steve Irwin once walked. By 2020, Robert's wildlife photography gained international attention, with exhibitions and awards placing him among the most promising young photographers in the world. On the surface, everything seemed to be flourishing. But those closest to him, including Terry, saw signs of emotional strain. His schedule grew increasingly demanding, leaving little time for rest or reflection. He was expected to be fearless, endlessly enthusiastic, forever smiling, the embodiment of the Irwin legacy. Yet, Robert was human, navigating heartbreaks, self-discovery, and overwhelming responsibility. Terry recognized the signs instantly. She had seen this before in others consumed by public scrutiny. The slow retreat inward, the quiet exhaustion that builds when a person feels watched at every turn. Beneath it all, Robert was grappling with a legacy that felt both like a blessing and a shadow. The turning point came in late 2024 and early 2025, when Robert began showing signs of a shift that neither fans nor family could ignore. The confident, energetic young man who once radiated his father's carefree spirit now appeared different. Quieter, heavier in expression, and increasingly distant from the public image he had maintained for years. What the world saw as a new phase, Terry recognized as something deeper, something that stirred an ache she had tried to bury since 2006. Robert's demeanor changed first. He spoke less in interviews, choosing his words with caution rather than enthusiasm. Friends close to the family described him as thoughtful but withdrawn, a young man wrestling with expectations he could no longer shoulder easily. For Terry, seeing this shift felt like watching the brightness of her son dim under a weight he didn't choose. She cried privately, overwhelmed by the fear that Robert, like Steve in his final years, was being consumed by the demands of a world that adored him but didn't always understand him. Then came the Bonds underwear campaign. Robert's viral, internet-breaking photo shoot reintroduced him to the world in a way no one expected. It was bold, confident, and shockingly far from the wholesome image the Irwins had carefully built for decades. Terry was reportedly surprised, even worried. The Irwin brand had always been tied to family-friendly conservation, not steamy modeling campaigns. At first, she questioned whether it aligned with what she and Steve built. She feared the backlash, the misinterpretation, the possibility that her son was straying too far from the mission that defined their lives. But when Robert explained his reasoning, that linking two iconic Australian names, Bonds and the Irwins, was a strategic move, a step toward carving out his own identity, Terry softened. She understood that her son wasn't rebelling. He was searching for himself. Yet, even with that understanding, the emotional toll lingered. The shift in his appearance, the sudden muscular physique, the shift toward fitness branding. These changes raised questions she wasn't sure how to answer. To the public, it was just a photo shoot. To Terry, it was a sign that her son was growing into someone she wasn't sure she fully recognized anymore. As Robert's transformation continued, another painful layer emerged. His growing desire for independence. For years, the Irwin family had lived under one roof at Australia Zoo. But insiders began whispering that such closeness might now be holding Robert back. Friends felt it was unhealthy for a 21-year-old to live with his entire family. When rumors surfaced that Robert was quietly dating Charlotte Briggs, insiders claimed he was waiting for his mother's approval before making the relationship public. That level of emotional dependence, while touching, left Terry conflicted. Reports suggested that Terry wanted Robert to focus on his career, especially after his breakout success co-hosting I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here in 2024. She was proud of how far he had come. But as Robert began leaning into fitness culture, bodybuilding aesthetics, and high-profile modeling opportunities, Terry couldn't escape the fear that he was drifting toward an identity shaped more by outside pressures than by the mission she and Steve built together. By early 2025, the boy who once carried Steve's fire with pure innocence now seemed caught between worlds. Robert had never been allowed to grow up slowly. He never had anonymity, privacy, or the freedom to make quiet mistakes. The truth that haunted Terry was this: Steve's legacy was never meant to imprison their children, but to inspire them. Yet Terry could not shake the image of losing another part of Steve. Not to tragedy, but to transformation. She wondered whether Robert was trying to escape the shadow of a man the world still mourns, or simply searching for a version of himself untouched by grief and expectation. In the quiet moments no one sees, Terry has cried not because Robert is lost, but because he is changing. And change, even when healthy, can feel like loss to a mother who has already endured the deepest heartbreak imaginable. But through every fear, every tear, every moment of doubt, one truth remains: Terry will stand by her son, even if his path leads him far from the one she once imagined. And Robert, no matter where he goes, will always carry a piece of Steve Irwin's spirit, whether the world recognizes it or not. What do you think about Robert's recent transformation? Share your thoughts below, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this.